Unexpected.
I think I am pregnant.
Unbelievable.
Well, how?
All that standing about, waist deep in icy water. Keeps your ghoulies cold.
And unconfirmed.
We go down to the chemist, you perform in a bottle, and within seconds, we know.
So will there be a Little Chef tomorrow 9:30 on BBC1?
Could her children be the subjects of a strange scientific experiment? Could Grace be under fire? BBC2 has the answers in about 3 minutes.
Ever since its opening in 1910, the London Palladium has been famous for comedy and for laughter.
Where is the hottest part of the sun, page 3?
Love for variety and for entertainment.
Hello, Playmate.
Let's say goodnight, Gracie.
And renowned for its many stars.
It's the most famous theatre in the world, and I think bar none.
Join Paul Merton and the cast of hundreds who have shared the Palladium story beginning Sunday at 8 on BBC1.
Here on BBC1 in half an hour, Crime Limited focuses on the parents of a murdered teenager who are campaigning to have abolished the unique Scottish verdict of not proven. And that's after the news now on BBC1 with Peter Sissons. It's 9 o'clock.
The man accused of killing Rachel Nickell has been freed after the case against him was savaged by an Old Bailey judge. Colin Stagg heard the judge accuse the police of blatantly trying to trap him into confessing. 6 people have been killed by the collapse of a walkway at a Channel Ferry Terminal. And a significant advance in the treatment of breast cancer. Scientists have isolated the gene that causes it to be inherited. Good evening. The man accused of the brutal murder of Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common 2 years ago today walked free from court before the trial proper had even begun. The judge at the Old Bailey threw out the prosecution case after days of legal argument without a jury. The case against the accused, Colin Stagg, depended on the evidence of an undercover policewoman who had befriended him. Today, Mr. Justice Ognall said the police behaviour betrayed not merely an excess of zeal, but a blatant attempt to incriminate a suspect by positive and deceptive conduct of the grossest kind. Tonight, Scotland Yard, while refusing to comment on the judge's rebuke, said it regarded undercover work as one of its most necessary and productive investigative methods.
After more than a year in custody, accused of a murder that horrified Britain, Colin Stagg emerged from the Old Bailey declaring his innocence. He was asked the question, did he kill Rachel Nickell?
No, I didn't. I never made no confession or anything to suggest that I was the murderer of Rachel Nickell.
He said he'd considered suicide because of the pressure, and he expressed sympathy for Rachel Nickell's parents.
Don't be angry with me because I didn't do it. If you want to be angry with someone, be angry with the real murderer and the police who set me up in this operation.
Rachel's mother and father had listened as the judge discharged Stagg, ruling the police case against him inadmissible. For the Nickell family, it was a great disappointment.
I'm sure that the ruling is well argued in law and guided by many a precedent. The effect is, however, to rule that all the evidence gained during the undercover operation is inadmissible in a court of law. The law has been upheld, but where is the justice?
It was on a July morning 2 years ago that Rachel set off for Wimbledon Common with her 2-year-old son, Alex. Her body was found by a passer-by in a secluded wooded area. In the frenzied attack, she'd been stabbed 49 times and sexually assaulted. The little boy was found still clinging to his mother's body. A home video of Rachel was released as part of the hunt for her killer. The devoted mother, described as a shining light, chose the common for walks as she felt it slightly safer than other open spaces. The Old Bailey heard how, after Stagg's initial arrest and release, the police had launched the undercover operation, controlled by psychologist Paul Britton, who told officers the killer would be strongly inclined towards sexual fantasy. A woman officer using the pseudonym Lizzie James then began writing to Stagg, who, at an earlier hearing, had been fined for indecently exposing himself on the common. Over 7 months, a series of sexually explicit letters, telephone calls and meetings in Hyde Park took place between the two. Rachel's murder was often discussed. The aim, the prosecution said, was not to trap or trick Stagg into making an admission. Rather, it was to investigate his sexual fantasies. Ultimately, the court heard to see whether a psychological profile of him would match one drawn up of Rachel's killer. Stagg's letters contained a number of fantasies, some of them violent, involving the use of a knife. John Nutting, prosecuting, said Stagg admitted to being on the common at the time of the murder. He alleged that Stagg knew the position of Rachel's hands after her death, but Mr. Nutting accepted police operations of this kind are necessarily on the edge of evidential admissibility. William Clegg, QC, defending, argued Lizzie James had lied, offered inducements of sex and a relationship, encouraging Stagg to become more extreme in his fantasies. In her early letters to Stagg, the WPC had said of his sexual fantasies, "I bet this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to you than meets the eye. You are as broad-minded and uninhibited as me." He had replied in a letter, "I have never had anyone to cherish or to love except you. You brighten up my life. I want us to go steady and have a long-lasting relationship." In another letter she had said, "There can't be anything between us, Colin, if only you had done the Wimbledon murder." The court heard that Stagg had responded using words to the effect that, "I am terribly sorry, but I did not." The policewoman had still insisted, "I wish you had murdered her. It would make things for me. It would make me realise it was fate that brought us together." The judge, Mr. Justice Ognall, said the officer's behaviour, even under orders, was reprehensible. Rachel's boyfriend, Andre Hanscom, has since taken his son Alex with him to France to try and begin a new life. The man who was accused of killing the child's mother is now considering legal action against those who brought him to court. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
It's the second time in 6 months that a man charged with murder has been released after evidence from a police undercover operation was ruled inadmissible in court. Our Home Affairs correspondent Neil Bennett reports on the legal problems that this kind of operation can run into.
With so many miscarriages of justice caused by false confessions, people suspected of crime are supposed to be interviewed under strict guidelines. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act says they should be cautioned, questioned in a police station with a solicitor present, and the results tape recorded. But the quest for incriminating evidence is still being pursued by other means. When Patricia Hall went missing from her home in West Yorkshire, detectives suspected her husband Keith of murdering her. An undercover policewoman befriended him. He allegedly made admissions to her. The tapes were the basis of the case against him, but here too the judge said they couldn't be used as evidence, and earlier this year Keith Hall was acquitted. He spoke afterwards of the way the relationship with the undercover officer had influenced him.
I fell in love with the lady. Yeah, it's the top and bottom of it is, yeah, I'd have said anything just to keep the lady.
Despite the outcome of the Hall trial, the decision was made at the Crown Prosecution Service to go ahead with proceedings against Colin Stagg. The CPS says it still believes it was right, but one leading criminal barrister questioned the supervision of the case.
I want to know who's been vetting this case, knowing what the Police and Criminal Evidence Act says, knowing that there was a real risk that the judge at the end of the day would say that this is unfairly obtained evidence. It seems pretty obvious.
But Scotland Yard said tonight this was a complex area of law. We would wish to underline the importance of undercover police work, which is a method we have successfully used many times in the most difficult and dangerous circumstances. The prosecution of Colin Stagg relied heavily on psychological profiling. It had certainly helped track down Michael Sams, convicted of murdering Julie Dart and kidnapping Stephanie Slater. It's a relatively new technique, and in this latest case, one of the pioneers in the field thinks they got it wrong.
The police have been looking for an individual who will help them solve the problems, rather than doing the much more long-term work of developing the science. In this particular case, that's what's gone wrong.
After all the effort and all the controversy, the terrible murder on Wimbledon Common will surely never be solved. Neil Bennett, BBC News.
Safety experts are tonight continuing their investigations into the collapse of a cross-channel ferry gangway, which caused the deaths of 6 people. 7 others were injured in the accident, some of them seriously, at Ramsgate Harbour early this morning. It happened as passengers were boarding the ferry Prince Philip minutes before it was due to sail to Ostend. The ferry was moored at a terminal just outside the main port. Double-decker ramps carry cars onto the ferry, and there's a 3-section walkway for passengers to get from the terminal to the ship. The first section of the walkway collapsed, hurling passengers down about 40 feet. The investigation is expected to concentrate on the joints between the walkway's sections.
The accident happened just before 1 o'clock this morning, when the final handful of foot passengers left the terminal to board the Prince Philip. As they entered the covered walkway, it suddenly snapped, plunging 13 people nearly 40 feet onto a pontoon. Rescuers working in darkness found passengers were trapped under the heavy wreckage.
The people that were trapped were fairly accessible once we got onto the floating pontoon, which wasn't a difficult job, but lighting conditions meant that we had to be careful where we were going and didn't make the situation worse by moving a structure which was clearly already moving and could move further.
By the time help arrived, 5 people were already dead. Another died on the way to hospital in Canterbury. 7 others were treated for multiple injuries.
The patients are all currently stable, which means they're not at any immediate risk. The injuries are a variety of fractures, mandibles, spinal fractures, long bone fractures, pelvis fractures.
The gangway was specially designed for the Prince Philip, which at 28,000 tons is the largest ferry to operate from Ramsgate. Like all walkways, it was a safety feature, segregating foot passengers from heavy lorries and cars. It had been in use for just a few months, with only slight teething troubles.
With any piece of mechanical equipment, you will have minor problems, like little small tuning things and so on, and occasionally, a button needs adjusting and that sort of thing. But there haven't been any problems which have affected the safety at all.
Today, accident investigators were studying the flexible joint area at the gangway's broken end. One difference is that while the right-hand side shows a steel rod, on the left-hand side there's no rod visible. Gangways have to endure a lot of stress, from tidal movements, ship buffeting and heavy vehicles. That may be a factor.
My guess, either structural failure, which I think is unlikely, more likely something to do with vessel movements of some nature, as yet unspecified.
The Ramsgate order was a one-off for the gangway's Swedish makers, but the Fiab company supplies ramps for numerous roll-on, roll-off ferry terminals, and their pontoons and bridges are in worldwide use.
We have been doing projects of the same complexity for 25 years and never had any problems like this.
But not gangways of this type?
Not gangways.
Isn't that a difference?
Technically, not very big difference.
The gangway cost £150,000 and was fully tested before safety certification. The investigators' report will be anxiously awaited by many port authorities. Gangway designs are all fairly similar, and if there is an unknown weakness, it needs to be identified. This afternoon, the Prince Philip finally returned to Ostend, many hours late. Most of the 400 passengers have been interviewed by the police to see if anyone could throw light on just what happened. Christopher Wayne, BBC News.
2 people have been charged under the Firearms Act after parts of a gun and ammunition were discovered in Durham jail. Only last weekend, 5 IRA prisoners attempted an armed escape from Whitemoor prison in Cambridgeshire. The Home Secretary Michael Howard has promised a full inquiry.
This latest prison security scare was prompted by the discovery of 6 live rounds of ammunition at Durham prison following screening of visitors. They were visiting a Category A high-risk prisoner, and the procedure at Durham is for such visitors to pass through metal detectors. Prison officers then searched the top security segregation unit, finding a handgun split into 2 parts, one hidden in a tissue box, the other secreted inside a prisoner's body.
Prison security.
Durham's administrators back at existing security measures.
We have procedures in place which up until yesterday we were satisfied were working effectively. Clearly, until we know whether or not those procedures were in any way at fault, it would be premature to start tightening up in any particular way.
It's thought the gun was intended for a convicted armed robber who's made 2 escapes in recent years and who's been transferred to another prison since yesterday's incident. A letter from a prison officer in July warned the governor that this inmate was attempting to have firearms supplied to him.
Something is really dramatically wrong when the clearest of information is provided to management about these serious matters and nothing then is done about it.
3 years ago at Durham, visitors tried to smuggle in an imitation firearm to a convicted IRA bomber. There are no terrorists at Durham now, but last weekend 5 IRA prisoners used firearms attempting to escape from Whitemoor Prison in East Anglia. The opposition says ministers are responsible for security.
Where there are questions that go to the heart of whether this service, the prison service, is being run properly, it is the politician who should be responsible. It is the politician who should be accountable, and that should not be shuffled off in any way onto civil servants.
We are absolutely determined to do all we can to make our prisons as secure as they can possibly be made. We have arrangements in place to achieve a high level of security. If and when they fall down, then we must take whatever action is necessary to put that right.
Inquiries into Whitemoor and now Durham must determine whether the security lapses were the fault of individual prisons or Home Office policy. Wesley Kerr, BBC News.
The husband of the murdered Building Society manager, Carol Wardell, has been speaking publicly about her death for the first time. Gordon Wardell described his wife's killers as evil and said he'd lost everything.
Gordon Wardell, still in a wheelchair, was brought to a police news conference from a hospital bed. He'd suffered what police called superficial injuries, but had been too distressed to talk to them until yesterday. They hoped his appearance today might stimulate more public help.
I would like to thank all friends and well-wishers who've given myself and my family's support, and would urge anybody who knows anything about the death of my wife to come forward.
Mr. Wardell recounted how he'd arrived home on Sunday night to find his wife Carol being threatened with a knife by a man in a clown's mask. He himself was grabbed from behind, smelt some type of chemical and passed out. He woke to find himself bound and gagged, he said.
I'm still trying to come to terms with the whole situation. I don't know exactly what has happened. But I've lost everything.
Mr. Wardell was asked about a newspaper report that he'd been convicted of a knife wounding charge 24 years ago. Police called the report unhelpful. Mr. Wardell said it was irrelevant and that his only interest was in catching his wife's killers, whom he described as totally evil. Mike Mackay, BBC News, Nuneaton.
A Railtrack inquiry has found that driver error was to blame for the passenger train derailment at Bickley in Kent during last week's signal workers' strike. A supervisor was running the local signal box when 2 trains were on the same stretch of line. The inquiry found that a driver had passed a red light and then tried to reverse his train without permission. He's been suspended. Today's figures on prices and unemployment provided further evidence of a more buoyant economy. The headline inflation figure rose slightly to 2.4% in the 12 months to August, up 0.1% on the previous month. And there was a bigger than expected drop in the number out of work to just under 2.6 million. But the improvement is still uneven.
At Grindthorpe in Yorkshire, the fall in the national jobless total means little. The bulldozers are erasing the last signs that this was once a pit village. More than half the miners who lost their jobs are still out of work. A new training and advice centre is the main hope to those desperate for employment.
It's like someone's put a big foot down on the village and stamped on it and tried to obliterate it. A lot of people now have mass unemployment in this area, and that's why probably have had troubles around here. There's no jobs for them. It's people who's left school 20, 21-year-old, never had a chance to work.
Bulldozers too at Farmington Quarry near Cheltenham, but the story here could scarcely be more different. Such is the popularity of the quarry's famous Bath stone around the world that it's having trouble meeting demand. The workforce has increased from 6 to 60. Recruiting skilled masons is not a problem, but finding and keeping unskilled workers is.
Well, certainly around here, there's a very good opportunity. We are expanding and we need more labour the whole time. And I mean, I just can't find it. Well, I can't find good labour.
6 months ago, a new pay scheme was introduced here, which pushed up the wages bill by a quarter. At the same time, the company has put up its prices by around 10%. It's cost pressures like that which persuaded the Chancellor to put up interest rates earlier this week. Underlying inflation, which excludes mortgage interest payments, has fallen dramatically from nearly 10% in 1990. But that sharp decline stopped over a year ago. Today's small increase to 2.3% did not prompt this week's rise in interest rates. That was triggered by fear that over the next 2 years, inflation will rise above the government's self-imposed ceiling of 2.5%. Share prices fell sharply today because investors think interest rates will have to rise again to curb inflation. But the reason inflation went up last month is that summer sales came to an end. Clothing and footwear prices saw their biggest rise in August since the First World War. Consumers, though, have shown a great unwillingness to pay higher prices. So last month's rise in inflation could easily prove short-lived. Greg Wood, BBC News.
Scientists in America say they've discovered the gene which causes the inherited form of breast cancer. Thousands of British women die of breast cancer each year, about 1 in 20 caused by the inherited gene. Now, a test could soon be developed to identify women who carry the gene.
1 in 12 women in Britain develops breast cancer. In about 5% of cases, the disease runs in the family. Groups of scientists around the world have been racing to find the gene which causes the disease by studying these families. Now it seems the race has been won by scientists in Utah and North Carolina. In Britain, cancer scientists are delighted the gene has at last been found.
I think the discovery is a very important step forward on the route to understanding how breast cancers develop, and in the medium to long term I think this should lead us to better ways of treatment and prevention.
Up to 1,000 women a year in Britain develop breast cancer as a result of having the gene. Their family trees provide valuable information about how it's inherited. Now the gene has been found, it's likely a test will be developed within a year which could identify women who have the gene and who are therefore likely to develop the disease. Those found to be at risk could be offered regular screening, or they might decide to use the drug tamoxifen, which is currently under trial as a way of preventing the disease developing. A few may even decide to have their breasts removed before there's any sign of disease. Scientists today stressed the discovery doesn't mean a cure for breast cancer is likely, but it's a very important step forward. James Wilkinson, BBC News.
The government is strengthening the rules on the transport of live farm animals after consultations with animal welfare groups, ferry companies and farmers. Those breaking the new rules could be sent to prison. Every time animals travel for more than 15 hours, the journey will have to be authorised in advance by a government vet. This follows a ban on transporting animals by 3 major ferry companies and British Airways. The O.J. Simpson murder trial is expected to dominate American TV screens when it begins in Los Angeles in the next few weeks. There's already been saturation coverage of Simpson's arrest and the pre-trial hearings. In his final report from Los Angeles, our legal correspondent Joshua Rosenberg looks at how O.J. Simpson was made into an American hero by television and how television could now help to destroy him.
3 months after Nicole Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were murdered in this Los Angeles suburb, the looky-loos, as they're called, still come to stop and stare.
They said it was just a large amount of blood. And they said, my wife was telling me that it rolled all the way out to this sidewalk. There was blood everywhere.
Local residents hoot with fury whenever they drive past a tourist or a camera crew, but still the visitors come, as if drawn by television, to the shrine of a fallen hero.
Somebody that you admired, and to see a tragedy like this, I hope he's innocent. But it sure looks like it's going to be overwhelmingly against him, I think.
The people who come to stop and stare find it hard to accept the evidence of their own eyes. Surely 2 people couldn't have been murdered just a few yards from a busy street.
Surely their hero, O.J. Simpson, couldn't have been charged with those murders. It's as if they find it hard to believe what they've seen on television.
Television made O.J. Simpson the best known and most widely respected American ever to be charged with double murder. After his retirement from the football field, he was still a friendly face on the screen, first as a sports commentator and then as a ham actor in films like the Naked Gun trilogy. And television was there to watch the famous running back on his last run from justice. With a warrant out for his arrest, the police traced O.J. Simpson to a white Ford Bronco car being driven by a friend. Mr. Simpson said he'd kill himself if anyone tried to stop them. As the networks broadcast the scenes live from their helicopters, normal life ground to a halt. With 95 million people watching in amazement, O.J. Simpson finally surrendered. Constance Rice is a leading civil rights lawyer in Los Angeles. She feels that this unprecedented television coverage could stop O.J. Simpson getting a fair trial by an impartial jury. And of course the story is perfect for Hollywood.
They're writing the movie now, you know, it was so saturated in the media that you're not going to be able to find very many people who haven't heard about a piece of evidence that will eventually be excluded. That's a concern. The other concern is that people's motives for wanting to serve on the jury. Everybody's writing a book and trying to become famous off of this case. And so you wonder, what are the motives of people trying to be in this jury pool?
When the jurors are finally sworn in, just along the corridor from this courtroom, they'll find the evidence easier to follow than they might have expected. All the documents, graphics and photographs they'll need will be displayed in court on large video screens. One of the judges who already uses this kind of trial by television told me that we shouldn't be frightened by modern video technology.
All we're doing is using technology to do what we have been doing for 200 years in a more effective way. Instead of using photographs that perhaps are only 10 by 18 inches, when we're able to bring those up on a 67-inch data monitor, the jury's going to be able to follow along with the testimony really at the most critical time, and that is at the time the witness is talking about the particular piece of evidence. This particular technology also allows, if the judge wants to pipe out the results of the evidence presentation system as it's being used, so that literally the people at home can follow along just as in the same great detail as the jurors with respect to the use of evidence.
Others claim to be fast, but nobody has more to do it faster.
Television made O.J. Simpson into an American hero.
Go, O.J., go!
It may soon be on hand to watch his downfall. Joshua Rosenberg, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Manchester United began their bid to win the European Cup tonight with a vintage performance against Gothenburg of Sweden. The match finished a few minutes ago, United winning by 4-2.
United's first game in the first season of the Champions League. This new preliminary 6-game format designed to guarantee big money to big clubs before the inconvenient unpredictabilities of the knockout stage. But surprises, even extravagantly attractive matches, it seems, are still possible. Gothenburg took the lead in the 27th minute through Pedersen. 7 minutes later, United were level as the ball fell eventually to Ryan Giggs. And after half-time, more goals, more excitement. A drive from Kanchelskis to put United ahead, a free kick and a diverting flick from Rain for 2-2, and then a shot from Ince, a save onto the bar from Ravelli, and a tap-in from Giggs for 3-2. A fourth from Sharp hardly flattered. United's European season is emphatically underway. Rob Bonnet, BBC News.
And the main news again. The case against the man accused of murdering Rachel Nickell on Wimbledon Common has been dropped. The judge ruled that the prosecution evidence from an undercover police operation was inadmissible. As usual, Newsnight is on BBC 2 at 10:30 from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
The first of a new series of video diaries on BBC 2 in a couple of minutes offers a unique insight into the life of a diagnosed schizophrenic.
This is BBC1 South West.
Hello, good evening. The trust which sacked Pat Cooksley is offering her the chance to return to work, but only on similar conditions she's already turned down. But the Trust has also re-advertised her job at a lower grade.
As a health minister arrived at the height of the crisis at Derriford Hospital, the news emerged that an olive branch was being offered to Pat Cooksley. Now she's been cleared by nursing's governing body, the Trust wants to put forward a revised offer, but it denies it's a climb down.
We now know the position of the UKCC. On the 10th of August, we did not know what their reaction might be. And now that that's been clarified, I am most anxious to speak to Mrs. Cooksley directly.
But Pat Cooksley believes the Trust should reinstate her without conditions, and she's considering whether to meet managers for talks on Friday.
Thousands of fish are believed to have died in a major pollution incident in Somerset. It's understood 25,000 gallons of slurry was discharged into a tributary of the River Tone near Taunton from a nearby farm. The incident has caused a mile-long slick, which has travelled 4 miles downstream. The National Rivers Authority is trying to stop the contamination. Plans to build 2 huge rubbish incinerators in Devon could be scrapped because of fears over cancer. A disturbing report from America has highlighted the link between burning rubbish and the effect on the health of people living nearby, and Devon County Council has now agreed to reconsider its proposals. Let's take a look at the weather now. Rather cloudy with showery rain at first, however becoming brighter and somewhat drier with sunny spells and isolated showers by the afternoon. A top temperature tomorrow of 16 degrees Celsius in a fresh to strong northwesterly wind. That's it from us for tonight. Good night.
A very good evening to you. Well, 10 hours of sunshine today at Lerwick in Shetland, but that really was the exception to the rule. For many areas it's been thoroughly miserable, and more wet and windy weather coming up tomorrow as well. The reason for this bad weather, if you like, is this area of low pressure off the south coast. That's going to intensify, move steadily northeastwards in the next 24 hours, and eventually it'll move away through Scandinavia, but it'll take until the end of the weekend before it eventually disappears. Does mean to say windy weather continuing in many parts of the country right through until Saturday. So a bad weather warning for tonight, especially across Wales, the Midlands, Lincolnshire, Norfolk and Humberside. Some heavy rain, local flooding certainly on the cards, and it'll stay windy as well with rather hazardous driving conditions to watch out for. We've seen that slow-moving band of heavy rain roughly from Cambridge through to Leeds throughout the afternoon and evening. We've seen some heavy storms further south as well, about an inch and a bit, 30 millimetres or so in a storm around Newbury earlier on this evening. But those storms gradually moving away now. It's this band of heavy rain across central parts of the country we've got to watch out for. You can see just how wet it is at the moment through Lincolnshire and through the heart of the Midlands. So more wet weather to come in many parts of England and Wales tonight. Just 1 or 2 showers left in the southeastern corner, but further north a different kettle of fish altogether. For Scotland and Northern Ireland, by and large, dry, clearer and colder, but everywhere it will get increasingly windy. And that windy weather continuing throughout the day tomorrow. In fact, the winds strengthening to gale force, possibly even severe gale force down that eastern coast come tomorrow night. A very, very cold wind it's going to be as well. So a wet start for many central and eastern parts of England especially. Still some rain across Wales and the West Country as well through the morning into the early part of the afternoon. But eventually those western areas should begin to get a little bit brighter. The rain continuing, some of it heavy across many eastern parts into the Midlands as well, right through the day. Also the chance of some of that rain pushing back up into southeastern parts of Scotland as we go through the afternoon. Well, there's that cold wind blowing, so temperatures tomorrow just 12 to 14 degrees. Still windy, still very showery indeed on Friday. Still some persistent rain in the extreme east, but things gradually improving on Saturday. And that's it.
I'm the top, you're the bottom, and I don't change positions.
Ex-porn star meets anti-porn campaigner. Together they plan the ultimate woman's erotic fantasy. Screen 1, 2 golden balls.
If we can figure out how to turn her on, we shall truly have our finger on the biggest energy button this world has ever known.
You are the herald of a new dawn. This is war.
I will not be playing pussy. So what do you really want then, Linda?
Hunky, powerful, gorgeous-looking man you could really fancy. But you're all sex-obsessed. Sex. You don't have to feel guilty.
Get her. Here. Now.
Screen 1, 2 golden balls. Sunday at 9:20 on BBC1.
You're a fighter. That's what you are. A fighter.
Where there's muck, there's trouble.
You did it, remember? I wasn't alone in that room, you know. You chased me.
It might have been that she were drunk.
It were 4:30 in the afternoon, Ned.
There's procedures. Warnings. Not for booze. Just make sure.
Leave it out, will you? Must be thirsty.
Had a drink.
Nice glass of beer.
Beer makes me go whopping.
I'm sick of pulling myself together. I hate it round here.
common as muck in half an hour on BBC One.
They're out there somewhere.
Before that on BBC One, Nick Ross presents more real-life dramas focusing on the victims of crime. Crime Limited.